Hey, hi everyone. Welcome to the first of the two-part series that we are going to do on all things UX under our series Everything Products. We have a very power-packed panel today. Let me start by welcoming both of them and introducing them. First, we welcome Sukhada, who heads the global UX research at Airbnb. I guess no introduction required for Airbnb. So her group has, they look at three different functions: experience research, survey science, as well as competitive research. And she oversees, all aspects of product research at Airbnb. Before that, she has, led similar global research for Yahoo, Shutterfly, PayPal, all the biggies. And she has worked with, wide range of tangible as well as intangible products. Very passionate about building strong teams and brings a very interesting background. She actually started with a B Arch from JJ School in Mumbai. So that's the architecture, which is not the software kind, the other kind. And then MDes from Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago. Welcome, Sukhada. Thanks. And then we have Ketakee. Welcome, Ketakee. So, she's lead UX designer at Unbox. And Unbox is the UX competency at GS Lab Gaps. So Ketakee brings, again, 12 plus years of experience, specializing in, interaction design, digital design, user research, design systems, as well as delivery, right? And she has designed end-to-end digital solutions for our customers, help them create very interesting, so to say, delightful UX for data-heavy enterprise and consumer applications, both across various domains. She really likes working closely with the stakeholders, helping them identify the complex business and user requirements. So that's a real forte. And her strength has been in managing and working with truly multidisciplinary teams, cross-functional teams. And she has done her master's in strategic design management from, NID Ahmedabad. So welcome both of our panelists. Thanks for being here. So we're going to float a quick audience poll, just to get to know, how are folks placed, what are they currently working on, and what are they right now doing from a UX point of view. So we'll give them a few seconds to to indicate their choice. Also, in between, please feel free to post your questions, and as per the time, we'll be able to take those up. We'll also have some few minutes reserved at the very end for the Q&A. Okay, we can close the poll now. Thanks. All right. So a lot of folks, more than 60% actually working on digital product and the US aspect. All right. Hey, thanks everyone for responding. So, I want to sort of, get started with this whole, field of UX research and a little bit of its evolution, but not only the theory side. So, we have all seen it evolve from being merely looked at as design, then maybe called usability, and now more and more being called product research. So maybe I'll, request Sukhada first. So, how would you describe sort of shift going from consulting only to more of this collaborative? And if you may add, please, using the data and triangulation to make it more effective. How do you look at it? Please.
Yeah. A really good question, Mandar, especially I think to set the baseline for where we are today. UX research has certainly evolved and expanded. And you mentioned a few of the titles that have kind of evolved. And in the last 2 decades of my experience with research, I think this function has really moved from focusing solely on product effectiveness, efficiency, satisfaction, which was a very key component of being a usability engineer. But today it's more expanded to like numerous aspects of user-product relationship, like branding, nomenclature, social context, influence of competitors, or analogous products on experience expectations, to the interaction of the product. And I feel like with this expansion of the role, the ways of working have also evolved. Gone are the days when a single researcher would work in isolation, obsess over designing a methodological proper study, and is gone for days to carry out their research to only come back with a report that might even be obsolete, because the product teams have already moved ahead, they have a different speed. Today, we don't conduct our research in silos. We treat it as a team sport, really. And you may have heard this metaphor from other researchers who are kind of moving into that space. But the product manager, designer, data scientist, customer support, engineers, they're all key players of the sport. And as a team, we literally need to pass the ball to each other to strategically score the goal. And if I were to translate this metaphor, today we leverage everyone's knowledge to guide the product in the right direction. Everyone has a role to play. And then the question that pops up usually is, does this mean now that everybody can do their research? Well, not quite. While working collaboratively has huge advantages for everyone involved, the researcher still plays a pivotal role, a lead role in orchestrating how the research is structured, carried out, ensuring that we have the most updated information, we've considered all aspects of the product, and is aligned to company goals. So today, as a research leader, I find myself focused more on research environment, on creating a research environment that favors agility, nimbleness to bring the user voice into product. And also creating empathy. The empathy shouldn't just come from a researcher, but all those players who are a part of that team sport. It's a long answer to your question, but I feel like it's important to kind of baseline this where we are today. So yeah.
No, great, thanks. I think, loved the analogy from a sports side, right? So as I see it, sort of, translating your answer, it seems like not just technology and the typical design aspects, but also the psychology of the users, so many of the market realities, clearly the business goals and those realities. So it's truly multidisciplinary. I know that term is, being thrown around quite a bit, but seems truly a team sport. So yeah, lovely analogy. Thanks. So Ketakee, in your experience, you have seen more of this, consultative approach. What would you, say that some of the aspects might be, which are sort of, little less talked about, so that our listeners can benefit from that?
Sure. Mandar, most of the time what I see, because I am in a service model, I see that the time that we are in any project with any customer, the impact that we make in such a short time, because it depends on the timelines, how much time are we involved, or even a single designer is involved with that client for what time period, and in such a short time period, the impact that that design team makes on the product, the business, the strategies of that customer, I think that is something that is very important, because what the UX team really does when they enter any project with a customer is they do their deep dive, they understand the domain, they understand stakeholders, users, competitors. At the same time, they're also educating the customer as to why this UX process is important and what are you going to get from each of these steps that we are going to, And so I think that part is where I believe UX team acts like an anchor or like a captain of the ship, because they kind of, connect the dots. They are outside of the team in a way, but they connect the dots with all sorts of groups, be it the development, be it the product owners, be it the stakeholders. So we work very closely with all of these varied groups, and we are able to make connections that maybe somebody else cannot. So that ambiguity to clarity, that journey, is very important. I feel that is something where UX team, any designer for that matter, contributes a lot to, because at times stakeholders say they know something about their products, and maybe that's right too. Some really do know their products, but UX team kind of helps, churn everything by asking basic questions, by bringing everyone together for a common goal, because the technology and everybody has to work together to get that product out. So all of that, I think, while being empathetic to the clients and their goals and being in their team, so there are multiple threads that one UX team is kind of working with. I think that is something that is not understood by many, that how many small nuances are there in any UX project, be any timeline, and something that we have to do is leave that my baby syndrome behind once we are away from that project, because we won't be in that project for a long time, may not be, but we do everything that, to make it successful, but we may not know, like we get to hear what happens to it, maybe, but we may not be a part of their longer strategic approaches, though we may have ideas, we may not be a part of that. So that is kind of a con, or the other side of which again is doesn't come out much. So yeah, I think that's what it is.
Yeah, nicely put. Thanks. So we are going to quickly ask a quick second question to our to our audience. Let's float that, please. You want to sort of get a sense of how many are really doing these user experience tests and learning from it. So while people sort of answer that, I sort of like that Sukhada, you have you brought the sports analogy, and while Ketakee was talking, I thought of the building a new house kind of an analogy, where the designer is not somebody just who comes after the fact and just paints it in the color that somebody has chosen, right? I mean, it's actually way more fundamental. They truly have to understand how that house or particular building is going to be used. And I mean, you come from architecture yourself, so I sort of love that angle that we have today with you there.
Yeah, when Ketakee was mentioning the two most important points that feels like it applies to every researcher, whether they're in consulting, whether they're in a company, in-house research team. One is just educating and bringing awareness to this function. I think that's like a lifelong responsibility that a researcher plays. And it's not because it's not a bad thing. I think it's a part of the role. It's also a new function. So I feel like that is something that will always happen. And then the second is addressing a question that I know my product, you don't need to worry about it. I feel like that comes up everywhere. And I loved your metaphor as well. It's not your baby anyways, right? I mean, but I think it's how to get this done right. And sometimes when you watch a person, use your product, you realize there were so many things that you were not aware of, and things that you thought were simple, actually your users struggle. And I feel like that is so valuable to watch and keep your your passion for your project or your product aside, and watch it with unbiased eyes. So I wanted to bring that up, and Ketakee, you made such a strong point there, and it applies everywhere,
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Do we have the poll results? Perfect. So I think most people have guessed right. About half the companies are actually carrying out these tests, which are super important to do. Yeah, so let's move on. So Sukhada, so continuing with your analogy of it being a team sport, I wanted to ask you, how have you seen sort of the organization structure change with respect to the research team as well as the product team, and then especially how did it play out during the pandemic, because it changed a lot of things.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt in anyone's mind that the pandemic did transform this function. And as much as we all agree there's a huge value in conducting research in person, there were numerous untapped opportunities that we explored during the pandemic, especially into like remote and online tools, literally bringing global feedback at the tips of our fingers, which was amazing. I mean, this methodology existed even before the pandemic, but the use of that methodology increased drastically during the pandemic, and we've kind of extended that even today. It's almost as if like the world has truly become smaller, I would say. So I would say today teams are doing a lot more remote research than before. Remote research isn't a replacement. I want to be very clear. It's not a replacement for in-person research in the long term, but I would say it's an important supplement to traditional research methods. Finding research participants have become much more quicker, easier than ever before. It has become easier to recruit a diverse, more global and representative pool of participants. The other aspect that has evolved during the pandemic is the way UX researchers collaborate and communicate with their team and users. Tools like Miro, FigJam have become the go-to tools for collaborating with stakeholders, conducting online workshop, participatory design sessions. I have to say documentation has also become much easier. Previously we used to have whiteboard notes and workshop sheets. It's now all online. It's become much more easier. But with all these advantages also comes a little bit of, drawbacks. Hallway conversations are now replaced by Zoom meetings. Serendipitous conversations don't happen anymore. So you only know what you've planned for. But things like you would meet somebody and they're working on something else and you learn about it, that's kind of missing today. And meeting fatigue is a thing now. But the way that we've addressed as a team is, really cutthroat prioritization, which is really, really key. Drawing boundaries have become very, very important. And I think we've kind of still working on it. Personally, I am, where my two worlds have collided. Working remotely, working from home means that my son can just walk in while I'm having a really important meeting or something else happens. So I think just drawing boundaries has become super important for all of us.
Great. Have you also seen scenarios where, because of this pandemic, so we sort of talked about what internally changed for you guys as a team, but have you also observed how people use some of these products differently, and were there some new behaviors that now you had to consider?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it almost felt like we had to relearn about our users. Over time, you start to kind of find, you have your principles, exactly what the users are, because you build on it. But the pandemic really changed everything. We literally felt like we had to restart learning what our users, how users interact online, what users prefer. Their requirements change, their priorities change. And in the Airbnb context, you would see that travel changed, right? The last 2 years, the 2 years of pandemic, nobody traveled. And when people started to travel, their requirements, their needs were completely different than what we knew before. So relearning was definitely something that we had to do. And I'm sure it's not just in the Airbnb context, everywhere. So yes, absolutely.
Very interesting. So yeah, it has clearly changed, the internal as well as the external dynamic. Yeah. Coming to Ketakee. So Ketakee, you sort of mentioned, how you have been more in the consulting mode. Would you throw some light on, working with the stakeholders, especially on this angle of, convincing them about the value itself of UX research, and especially given that they are usually on very tight timelines. These are early stage startups that typically we work with, especially, right? What would you say on that?
So the best part about the consulting work, I would say, is especially for a designer, and I'll also say why it's important, is you get to work in different domains with different kinds of user sets, with different kinds of application. And you get to study how the same user might be using their healthcare application, might be, at the work that they do, what kind of mentality they would have, and even the sheer knowledge that you gain by studying different domains. So when you have an N number of experience with different kinds of customers and the domains and the users, you as a designer become very quick at grasping new things, new domains, understanding nuances of new domains, or understanding what the products are all about. You become really quick at that. And you also immediately understand what kind of users are going to use these things. So that is something that is the best part of getting to work in a consultancy mode, because you have to be on top of the game at all times, because of the timelines, because of the way the work is structured, because of who all are you talking to in any organization for any customer, so you always have to have that sharpness of mind into getting things done. And as for the convincing of the research, I can just talk about what I have seen so far and how I work. So firstly, we always ask for a discovery phase, be it even of 8 days. Some discovery phase is better than no discovery phase at all, because then at least you are not totally off the mark with whatever you are creating, right? So that is something. And how to convince is mostly what we do is we explain the process in detail of each steps that we are going to take in the discovery phase and why they are important. Not just why they are important, but what are the outcomes of those processes. Because at the end of the day, what stakeholder is looking for is, how is this going to help me? Or how is this going to help my product become a better product? So you need to actually concentrate more on outcomes and tell them, okay, after each process, this is what we are going to get clarity on. And maybe it may not be the world's best clarity, or you may not get that one thing that is amazing from that research. You may end up only confirming your ideas, but that is still fine. You still know that, whatever you're doing is right. So I think talking about the outcomes, the ROI of the research is very important, how it is going to help them lessen the work or the repetitive work that comes later on. And it actually, companies end up spending a lot more on rework than the actual work. So maybe back up with examples from other projects, not obviously talking in detail, but giving some examples of how research help, or even generic examples that you find anywhere. Explain why it is important via examples and experiences. And also, I believe you should back up with data. Like I said, why it's important, what is the ROI, how is it going to help, or even we have so many research papers available on things like user research, why is it important? And business stakeholders really like to hear the percentile or the numbers behind that ROI. So when you explain that to them, it's very rare that they would say no for a shorter discovery phase, no matter how tight the deadlines are. And even if they do say no, it's going to be an informed decision. It's not going to be something that they are doing blindly. They at least know what are going to be the pros and cons of not having research in this phase. And if that happens, then what we ask for, generally my team and us, we ask for a subject matter expert. So we have done that in many of our projects where the timelines are really tight and they say there's no access to users as such. We can't get them for research. So what we do at that time is we talk to stakeholders. We do detailed stakeholder interviews where we understand their goals, their plans for the product, what the business need of the product, if it's a redesign, if it's the design from scratch, why do they want to create that product in the first place? And then we also ask for a subject matter expert. So in one of the projects, they had to take out that, get that out of the door in like 3-4 months. So we had really, really less time because they had to catch the market in time. So what we said that just please give us a subject matter expert if we don't have anybody else. So what we did is we used to have each and every design run through with the subject matter expert, because he, being in that industry for such a long time, he could tell us how users work, if something is going to work or not, how if some flow is really, really, becoming cumbersome, they'll say, oh, they don't have time to do so much. A simple feedback like that goes a long way than not having any feedback or not having any research or understanding of what we are trying to build. So rather than being totally off the mark, it's always better to have at least something to sink your teeth into. And if that also doesn't happen, then I think it's the designer's responsibility on their own, taking the time out, going a bit overboard, and then doing the research on their own, trying to understand the market pulse, the competition, and somehow or the other, as I said, fit the research phase into that timeline, because otherwise we are way off than our mark, and then it's again going to go downhill from there. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the detailed answer on that. So Sukhada, I remember you had sort of used this term of a narrative of a product, right? So linking from what Ketakee was saying, sometimes it seems to be the outcome of not having that sort of clear, or somebody not playing that pivotal role of placing that central theme, right? So would you like to comment on that one?
Yeah, I think product narrative, I want to address, a question that you had also asked Ketakee, because it kind of feeds into this product narrative piece. And she, Ketakee, you mentioned about educating, bringing awareness. Agree, that also happens. Showing success stories is also a critical part of making sure that, your stakeholders understand. Show, don't tell, quantify, show them data to convince them of the impact. And this is where, the second piece comes, which is product narratives. And, two things. One is, when you do research, I think you're doing research to inform a product decision. So having research stand alone or presenting your insights as a couple of slides is not as effective as making it a part of a product narrative, a more holistic product narrative that, that you're presenting to your leadership. So, making sure that, when you're sharing research insights, make sure that they're ingrained into the product, company, and user goals. In standalone research insights are not effective. They're not going to bring any impact that you're looking for. Make sure that your insights are a cohesive part of the product narrative, not the two slides that I mentioned. And I think that is important because ultimately what you're trying to say is, how does this data help you make that effective product decision? And if it is not doing that, then you have not really solved the problem. So I feel like that is something that we're moving towards. I've been guilty about it in the past, where I have decks of my research shown to my stakeholders and I have waited for them to use my insights. But I think that has proved to be great at that point, because it was that, standalone researcher going into their world, coming back with a report, not knowing where the product is. Times have changed now. You work together as a team, you triangulate, which is something that you brought up as well. And triangulate is basically working with other functions within the organization, like data science, like frontline insights, even, for that matter, your product managers. I feel like these are important partnerships and collaborative relationships that can bring your insights and bring more color to it. Ultimately, data science can help you understand what is happening on your site. What does the funnel look like? Where are the drop-offs? What kind of users are using your product? Consumer insights, or what you call market research in some companies, is what's the trend and sentiment? Which user segment should we focus on? And then, of course, CS tickets, because as CS tickets, you also see there are people who are having trouble, who are having problems. What are those key issues that users are bringing up? And as a researcher, when you start to triangulate your insights, which are really explaining why this is happening, you get those numbers, you get those data to support your insights. And that becomes a really, really strong narrative. Yeah. Did that help?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, thanks both of you for elaborating on that. We also have an interesting question to ask our audience, and we have some questions rolling in. So I'm just going to scroll through and see if anything was right on this point, and maybe ask that. But meanwhile, let's float the audience question as well. All right, just some interesting trivia for our listeners. Yeah, let's see how they got what everyone chose. I think there are a couple of already questions that both of you sort of asked. One was, for example, every stakeholder talks about, how they already sort of know the UX, and, they give some feedback, but it needs to be conveyed right. And I think both of you touched on that. So somebody asked that question as well. All right, so we have the results back, and I think most people have guessed it right. So it was Don Norman who primarily is credited for the term UX. Thanks. So yeah, so so I want to switch the gears a little bit and go to some of the details of the tools, and how we look at doing UX for some of the applications. So Ketakee, throwing this to you, how have you seen sort of the research happen for complex domains or applications which are data heavy? Any difference B2B, B2C that you sort of see? What would you say on that?
Yeah, so typically, I think B2B products that we've worked, or I've worked so far, have always been data heavy. So I think I'll answer that question with a B2B context as well. So in any B2B product, the understanding of the domain is critical. Also, understanding of the product itself is critical. What are the product stakeholders or the business trying to put out for the user? And because the application, the product is enterprise and most of the times data heavy, you also need to understand what kind of technologies are going to be used while actually developing that product, because that is critical in understanding as to why and what can be achieved in the given timelines that you have. Also, a thorough KT session from the experts, knowledge transfer. So if you are, for example, designing an accounting app for a banking domain, you should know how accounts work in the first place. If you don't know as a designer what tasks actually users are going to do, and being an enterprise product, it is going to have different levels of user and different roles, and then connection between all of these together. So you need to understand exactly what kind of tasks they're going to do. So some of the things that you'll do is have KT sessions. You can have in-depth interviews with users and stakeholders, both, to understand their daily task, and for stakeholders to understand the business context, understand what they're trying to achieve for that product, what plans do they have, what kind of market they think the product can have, all sort of things. And then I think understanding the user journeys inside of the application, especially for B2B, it is very critical, because the whole focus of the user in B2B application is getting the tasks done most of the times. So it cannot be flashy, some nice effect is coming from there and there. So that's not the whole point of B2B applications. The point is getting their tasks done easily. So we have to really concentrate on workflows. What is coming first? How are we trying to reduce users' data load? How are we trying to get, help them with their daily tasks easily than, making noise for them on the application? So typically, enterprise data heavy applications won't be flashy looking things. They would be to the point of the tasks that they do, concentrating more on workflow, what to take up, in front of what should the dashboard have, or what should the first level have, where should the user go in depth. So all of that will only come when you study the product and what the users are doing, each role, each persona is doing in that particular application. So that's what B2B, that's how I've worked in B2B, most of B2B applications. B2C is, more about how, and also B2B users cannot get out of that application and say, I don't want to use this one fine day, And also another nuances in B2B is that stakeholders might feel they like something and they might also approve something, but that may not be liked by the users, because users are different and stakeholders are different. So not getting in that trap and understanding who the actual user is and who the stakeholder is. And again, like I said, they can't say one fine day, I'm not going to use this. They have to do their daily tasks. So and in contrast, B2C, the user can just shut down the browser and say that, I don't want to engage with this anymore. So there, it has to be more about the experience. Also understanding, because B2C has varied and large number of users, focusing on who the actual personas are, at least getting an idea of the list of personas that you might have, their ages, their aspirations, why are they coming on that particular site or the application, what do they want from it. So each user might have a different goal. So understanding those goals and, bringing that together, also understanding what is the B2B, typically users are learned users because they know their tasks, while B2C, some might be tech savvy, some might be beginners, some are trying to get on that application as new people. So all of these contrasts between B2B and C have to be kept in mind. Also in B2C, I think you need to study the competition as well thoroughly, as for B2B as well. But for B2C, I think that really gets you many insights as to what the competition is doing. Is it working for them? So that is something, and what will appeal to these users, which will enhance the user engagement or retention of the users on that typical application or the website, anything that is B2C. So again, as users have rights to close it at any time, user retention and engagement becomes very important. And also studying of analytics. If you can get some data, do take a look at it, see where there have been product drop-offs. And like Sukhada said, you have to tie it up to what you're trying to create, and all of these methods that I talked about depend on what is the context of that application and what is the intent of that application. So everything doesn't apply everywhere, but this is what broadly I would say are the methods or the way of dealings with B2B and B2C.
Yeah, well put, thanks. So I want to actually connect that with Sukhada's extensive experience and also link it with one of the questions we see here. So somebody has asked that, how can organizations balance the modernization on one side, with the importance of maintaining a seamless user experience? and minimizing disruption. So that's one question, but I will sort of link that with what the B2C discussion that Ketakee brought up as well. Yeah, yes, over to you, Sukhada, please.
So I think modernization, I mean, I like the question. I was just trying to figure out how to best answer it. The way that, I see this working is we don't have the luxury of embedding a researcher in a product team, really. But having your research partner with you, I think helps you to even identify gaps or any place where the researcher can themselves jump in and say, I can help you answer that question, rather than you thinking or defining, oh, this is where I need research. Most times when people say they don't want research, it's not because they're trying to ship a bad product. It's just not knowing where to leverage research. And I feel like using research as thought partner is a very, I would say, is a luxury, but I think that's something that can really help us make the right decision. And I feel like that has worked to our benefit, but I know research teams are also becoming smaller. As you you must have heard, there are quite a few teams impacted, and research has been one of them. Research is always considered as overhead by most people. But again, I feel like there are better ways to do it, more nimble, more effectively. And there is a lot of data that you can leverage from outside. There are multiple tools that my team uses today, which can give us really quick data, quick insights. So it's not about the function being time consuming or it has longer timelines anymore. There is no excuse to really say we don't have the time to do research anymore. I think it's about just knowing when to leverage it. And the best way to do it is to leverage your research partner. So I would say that's that. There was one other thing I want to bring up. There was a time, and I can give you an example here, Mandar, if it helps understand how you can really leverage research, but also work with what your timeline is. Because most times everybody is really tight with timelines. I want to share one example from pre-COVID times. And the team was working on designing a new app for hosts. And hosts use Airbnb very differently than guests. Guests are there to get, inspiration. They love beautiful images. But hosts are there to really, they have tasks. It's very task-driven, utilitarian. And during this project, we had foundational research to really finalize information architecture, because I see that there was one question related to it for the app. And it was tied to very clear user needs. Who are our users? What do they require? And what are the prioritized list? There was iterative research in the process as well, but we used engineering. We partnered with engineering to do beta testing. We had to gather feedback anyways for the app that we were designing, but the interaction or the collaboration with engineering was super tight. And I felt like that was such a unique partnership. Usually research sits within design, but we had kind of expanded that role to work very closely with engineering. And we also had global research in a very longitudinal manner. So we were collecting feedback in our beta app. Engineering teams were kind of helping us triangulate, and we were making changes based on whether there were bugs identified. There were some localization issues that came up, which we had absolutely no clue. But I felt like this project was a success because we were all in it together. And we were designing the product not just for our users, but we were designing it with them. And I thought that was such an effective collaboration. And I feel like there are ways to do it, no matter how tight your timeline is, or maybe you don't know how to leverage it. There is a way to integrate that into your process.
Very interesting. So I liked in your example that, you talked of being nimble and, being very effective even with smaller teams. And clearly your example shows that you've also been able to do it by being nimble from an org level. So the way you work within each other's teams, or, formally you may be sort of classified in one box, but being able to step out of that box. So I think, credit goes to folks who are sort of, helping you manage that, and you yourself, of course, where, you have shown that agility, and because finally the focus is on the users, right? And getting the best product shipped outside. Loved that example. So, Ketakee, so both of you have sort of mentioned, some of these methods, but specifically to, bring the methods into the discovery phase sort of discussion, right? So, how have you leveraged those some of those methods in that phase? If you want to sort of continue from your earlier point.
Sure. In discovery phase, I'll list down, I'll talk about some of the methods that we use. But again, as I said, the context and the intent is how you would know where to use these methods. So these are not one size fits all kind of a thing, because depending on who the customer is, what are the products, what are the timelines, and what are the aims or milestones within that timelines, all of these methods will, you might use all, you might use some, depends on how, what are the circumstances for each project or the product that you're working with. So domain understanding is critical. Maybe with an SME, have nice long chats with SMEs, or even client side people who know really well the domain really well, who've been there in that industry for a long time. Talk to them. That will really enhance your domain understanding. Technological understanding, especially for data heavy applications. If you are working, say in a data science application where you have to create graphs, charts, there's data to be visualized. So you need to understand how is it going to be done at the back end or and the front end, and also to understand what are the tasks that the user is going to do in that particular scenario. And then stakeholder interviews are very important to understand the business side of it. And I'm stressing on this because unless, like Sukhada said, you tie your research or understanding to their goals, it is not going to make sense to them at all. Because otherwise, why are we doing what we are doing, right? So to understand that, stakeholders interviews are imperative to get them to the same understanding that you have, or to make them understand your even UX process, or to understand what are their goals, their aspirations, their plans, milestones, anything, their insecurities, their understanding of the market. So you get different perspective. It's their understanding versus the real market, and then you are somewhere in between. You're trying to try all that through. So that is one. Then user interviews. If it's the huge user base, then go with surveys, which will give you some quantitative data. And then like we had done this assignment for a huge number of users. So what we did was, first we floated a quantitative research, and once we got some insights from that quantitative research, we understood which areas we need to focus on, and then we scheduled the user interviews, where we kind of delved deeper into those areas which kind of flagged a lot in the quantitative analysis. So you have to strategize your research methods according to what you're trying to achieve. Also field studies. So there were times when we actually went to the field, went to the site to understand what the users are doing. So there's a very nice example within our team. So what we did was, we are working for a production company, and we went to the shop floor. So when we went to the shop floor, we went as interns. We didn't tell them that we are designers. So the way they interacted with us when they knew that we are going to be the new interns was very different than the other group who got to know that we are the designers. So catching users in their natural habitat, so-called, and understanding what they do when there's no focus on them. Because otherwise people try to just confirm what you already know, because that's how human mind works. So trying to go to field studies, studying industry standards, because in healthcare, for example, there are some industry standards set by the governments of different countries. So you need to understand those. Are there anything there that you need to take care of? Or even accessibility. Some countries make it compulsory to have accessibility standards into their websites or products. So understanding that part as well. And then studying the user journeys. I can't stress enough on this, because we have really had great results studying the user journeys, not just inside of the application, but their physical real life journeys. Because what we are trying to really do is, we are trying to embed a digital product into their actual lives. So unless you know where's that springboard from where that user is going to jump on the application, unless you understand that properly, you won't be able to design seamlessly the integration of that application into their real lives. So to give you an example for that, we were working in medical domain, and our understanding of what a certain user would do to get to an application was very different than their actual real life. So when we actually talked to them, we understood that, okay, this is not how the user journey should be on the application. This is never going to work, because this is not how the real life around that user is working. So we have to make sure that we kind of get that product to a level where it's integrates seamlessly into their real life. So again, user journeys, both digital and off digital, real, where they are, what they are doing. And then you can also ask if the stakeholders have any direct feedback from the users. What has it been, or the support team, what kind of bugs, tickets, issues are they getting from the users? This is especially true in B2B scenarios, because then you have many tenants, you are selling this application or the product to other companies. What issues are they facing, using your application, because they are the real users. So you can get really good help with the support team, like what kind of tickets, bugs are they getting, what kind of complaints they are solving every day, what are the tasks that users are unable to do, and lastly, you should create documentation for all of this. Each thing that you do, it should tie in to the whole product vision, or it should tie into the next step that you're going to take. Only then it makes sense to the stakeholders or even to the teams around you. And then if you share and discuss these findings in the stakeholder workshops, that's typically how we do it. And that has given us a lot of good results, because there the stakeholders are actually able to understand how that research has turned into vital insights and how that vital insights are actually helping your product. So discussing, sharing, bringing everyone together, I think if it is handled like this with your research methodologies, I think it creates a lasting impact.
Nice. Thanks for elaborating on that. So, Sukhada, so I wanted to sort of come to you. There is a question on, let's say there is a product like yours, which is live, being used by millions of folks across the world. How does, I'm sort of a little bit morphing the question that we got, but how does a continuing UX research look like for that? Maybe I'll let first.
So I was looking at the question, I was like, this is such an important question, because we are all so focused on preparing a product for launch. We forget that there is a maintenance part to it, which comes after the launch. And it's important to keep tracking it to see, can you close the loop, right? I mean, what we designed, is it actually working? Is there a way that we can iterate on the project or on the product? So a few things that, done in the past, and I feel like has worked really well, is having like a feedback loop. We also have a feedback link that sometimes we embed within the product experience. It's less of a push. It's more like, if people really want to give feedback in the experience, they could give. There are different intercept survey tools, which mean that if there is a particular part of the experience that you really want feedback on, that intercept could be embedded in the experience, and it would pop up as soon as the user has interacted with that page. That is a lot more, I would say, in context. It gives you exactly the data that you're looking for. It's not after the fact. But there are times when you cannot use an intercept because you do not want to break the flow and you want the user to check out as soon as possible. You don't want any friction in the flow. That's when we have introduced post-task surveys, which is more of and these are all quantifiable because you need that quantitative data to make changes to see. So that's another method that we've used. And then tracking your CS tickets. I feel like we really undermine the fact that people actually take the effort to go call up a CS representative and tell them what their problem is, which means they've already reached the stage where they cannot take it anymore. And I feel like we never account for it. So keeping these, it's almost like a multi-pronged approach, I would say. And I would put that in the bucket of maintenance, which we usually undermine. And I think that we need to keep doing that. So these are some of the things that, I feel are really beneficial to, one, see what the experience looks like, think about what's the next iteration of the product, and basically see if there are any other issues, bugs show up, what are those issues, and, tackle them and put them in your roadmap.
Got it. I also want to have another one, send your way. So somebody has asked that, about emerging trends and sort of best practices in UX research. So, you have been doing this in very stellar organizations for a long time. How do you think, companies can stay ahead, do this really well, stay a step ahead, so to say, in this UX game? Yeah.
Companies, yes, they need to stay ahead, but there are tons of vendors, people who are starting new companies, looking at where the gaps are, and they are experimenting. So we, within Airbnb, we do have a team that looks at all the new tools that are out there. You have to keep up, with the new inventions. There are, people who are inventing new tools trying it out, pilot it. We also attend conferences. We are also looking at piloting new things that come into the market. If it works, it works. If it doesn't work, then you move on. And this is part of, you can almost say, be innovative in the way you practice research. Sure, the tools are, there are new old methodologies that will always be here, but you have to come up with, new things that can be integrated into the old tools or old methods. So we do have a conscious, effort to go look for what's out there in the market and to integrate that. Sometimes those tools, probably come back with a newer version of it, which is way more different than what it used to be before. So like eye tracking, for that example, right? Previously, eye tracking machines were huge machines which were in isolation. People would go there, interact with the product, come outside, take a survey. Now there are so many more lightweight eye tracking gizmos, I would call it, where you can actually wear glasses, go out, market, shop around, and as a researcher, you're collecting all of that data. So I feel like as the function has evolved, tools have evolved, and keeping track of them is a primary function or primary role that you have to play. And with AI now coming into the picture, I feel like we have to really be on top of things and really look for what are some of those tools that can be integrated into our day-to-day in the ways of working.
Definitely. So I want to actually come back to the very last point that you mentioned, but let me request Ketakee to answer a quick question on the BA part, right? So the question is, how can we distinguish business analyst role of requirement discovery and the UX research role?
Yeah, and there are a couple of others as well about how to work with a BA. So business analyst is someone who would look at all parts of the product. They would actually write, for example, the way they would write is user should complete XYZ task. These are the users that will complete those tasks. These are the rights that those users would have. And this is what the backend will do at that time. This is what the front end will be doing at the same time. So they kind of document everything related to a single task in their documentation. That's how BAs work. And what we are trying to do is we are actually trying to create that in a real life. So what I have personally done many times is if there's a business analyst with your team, you should work very closely with them, firstly. And you should go in all of the calls together because that makes a huge impact. Because BAs would not have that skill that the UX person has, and UX would not have the documentation skill that the BA has. So they can actually work very well complementary to each other. So you should always, also somebody asked that what should we do if there's a BA and they are talking to the client. I would suggest that you please request the BA to get you in the calls as well, right from the day one, because that is going to give you the platform to ask the right questions to the client, which the BA might not end up asking because their task is to document the requirements and not actually to create the application. So I would suggest that you go together with the BA, talk to the client directly. It's always good to talk to the customers directly rather than having anybody in between, because the questions and the perspective that a UX designer is going to have, the business analyst may not be able to bring or even convey, even if you tell them to ask some questions. If there are follow-up questions from the client, the business analyst would not be able to answer how's the process going to go, or what the details are of the UX process. So that's my suggestion. Go in the calls with the BA, always work complementary with them, because sometimes in tighter timelines, it also happens that both work at the same time. So you are creating and they are documenting. So that really complements beautifully. And talk to the customers directly. Do not talk via the business analyst.
All right. Thanks. So, Sukhada, so our sort of the one of the last points that I wanted to bring out, right? So there are several questions on this. So let me sort of phrase it. But AI currently one of the hottest topics on everyone's mind, right? So how do you see that playing a role in the future of research? Somebody has just more provocatively asked it as is AI going to take these jobs up from the UX research field? So how do you see it play out?
Yeah, this has been a hot topic everywhere. The way I see it is, I don't think AI is a threat. In fact, I feel like just as we spoke early on how UX research as a function has evolved, I think AI is going to lead UX research to evolve even more in a direction we haven't even anticipated yet. I mean, we are already seeing advantages and applications where AI can help. We have been trying some from our end. A few applications that we thought would be really, really helpful is analyzing data. I mean, we have had, quite a few challenges analyzing multiple sources of data, bringing it into one, summarizing it. I feel like this is where AI can truly, truly help. We have started to use or look for tools where you can analyze large amounts of open-ended questions in a survey. Like, I feel like it has been pretty manual, of course. We've used R to analyze things, but I feel like this is where AI can really, really play a role to find patterns among millions of insights. Localization is another aspect. Like I said, the world is becoming smaller. Your product is reaching far more audience than what it used to be. How I think this is a place where AI can really help localize and also get localization or local data that is going to help you. And I truly believe that, being the optimist that I'm excited what AI brings to the evolution of this function. And I feel like instead of being worried, I think it's time to embrace the opportunity and partner with it. And who knows, maybe research will be done in a completely different way a few years from now. Our roles change as well. Similar to what you mentioned early on, Mandar, from usability engineer, now we are talked about as user experience researcher. And who knows what that new title looks like.
Right. So Sukhada, from your side, I think there was one question here sort of indirectly asked, but from your side, you have traced an arc of being in architecture, then design, and then several of those things now in product research. Any parting quick tips or thoughts for somebody who is much younger entering into these fields?
Keep an open mind. I feel like the journey that I've taken has always been not knowing what I'm getting into, but it's exciting for me. Passion, keep your passion coming. And I think creativity, your creativity doesn't leave you. So you should definitely get into it. There are tons of resources out there today. Like when I moved into UI UX, to be honest, nobody knew what I was doing for the longest time. And I kept getting the same question over and over again. We are in a very different world. Information is at your fingertips. I would say go out there, use those resources to really learn more. And it's no longer like a big function. There are nuances to each of them. Find what your passion is and move into it. When you had that poll about who designed or who defined user experience, I remember I'm a big fan of Norman Foster when I was, an architect. And now I've moved into like Don Norman. It's probably like the journey you never know, but it was a fun fact that I always keep in mind. So yeah, keep an open mind, be creative, be passionate, and find all those resources. Don't wait for somebody to come and tell you what to do.
So cool to hear that journey. So yeah, I want to bring attention of for all our viewers to this fact, right? So you have this excellent panelists today. They have tried to really bring out different aspects, nuances, and they have left us on a great positive note as to what may be coming, and not to be afraid of the next waves, but to go ride on those. Right? Hey, thanks both of you for such an insightful discussion. Really appreciate you guys taking out the time. Just a quick reminder, everyone. So the second fireside chat on some other aspects of UX. So in this 2-part series of ours with a similarly awesome panel. So we are going to be holding that on August 3rd. So check that out. Please do register for that one as well. And yeah, we'll see you on the 3rd of August, same time. So yeah, thank you all. Good day, good evening, good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.